Our next interview is with Hosea Baskin of Cumberland Rare Books. And Hosea, we're going to start off, as we do with everybody, talk a little bit about your youth, your family, background, education, and take us up through college. A little bio.
A little bio. Let's see. Born in Northampton, Massachusetts, to a couple of hardcore book collectors, Lisa and Leonard Baskin, and moved to the southwest of England, to Devon, when I was 5, and stayed there for about a decade. So most of my education was in the English school system, what you might call a classical education. One older brother, one younger sister, neither of whom are booksellers, though my sister is of late entering the art trade, works on paper. So my father, well, both of my parents are collectors. My mother would buy and hold. My father would tend to buy and sell and buy and sell. He's what the French call a marchand amateur. Which we really could use a word in English for. Yeah. And he is one of 3 siblings, and his brother was a rabbi and bookseller on the side, and his sister was a school librarian and a bookseller on the side. So clearly something ran in the blood.
Yeah, obviously, and it didn't run in the blood of your siblings. To the extent that it's done for you.
Yeah, to some degree. My brother is, while very bookish, he's a cell biologist, so he's
way up there.
Yeah, he's off someplace else, but he does like poking around used bookstores. My sister is in a different corner of the trade, but she's in the trade as well.
When did you come to the conclusion that you wanted to be a bookseller?
I started mucking around with books during college.
Give us a year.
Sure. It was really my sophomore year in college. I was 18, 19. I was at Yale. And a couple of things. I was messing around with printing presses. Again, there's a family tradition there.
Yeah.
My father had a private press for years, his whole adult life. And so I was raised around presses and ink. And luckily, Yale had a surprising number of presses tucked away in dark little rooms and basements here and there.
There's plenty of those at Yale.
Yeah. So started printing, and also started hanging around the libraries and taking some graphic design classes as well, and ended up doing a couple of special studies with Gay Walker, who was then the curator of the arts of the book collection, and sort of delved into the world of private press printing and the great private presses of the late 19th, early 20th century, both English and American. And through that really got interested in early printing, because I got curious about those, especially the English printers, William Morris and St. John Hornby and Cobden Sanderson, were all very interested in early printing as their typographic models. And so I got curious, what are these books that they're constantly talking about that were their exemplars? And so I tootled off to Beinecke and discovered that you could fill out a call slip for almost anything and they would bring it to you.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
And that was a really fun discovery. I mean, I'm sure I pissed off the serious researchers no end, because there'd be some poor graduate student sitting at the table next to me who'd be, trying to decipher some impenetrable manuscript. And there I'd be, and I'd have handed in a stack of 50 call slips, and, they'd bring out a little truck full of books, and I'd take a book and go, wow, that's really pretty. Next. Wow, that's really pretty. Next. And, I was learning. It was an amazing way to develop an eye. And, the amazing thing about a library like that is that everything is there. Pretty much whatever you're interested in, there's something relevant that you can pull out and look at. And so that was a crucial learning experience for me. After college, the other thing I did a lot of in college was rabble-rousing and radical politics.
That would make you any different than a lot of other kids.
Absolutely. I had a great time with it. And was sort of torn at the end of college whether to play around with politics and do books on the side, or play around with books and do politics on the side. And I think I looked at the people I knew who were slightly older, who were in politics, and I saw them burning out after 3, 4, 5 years. And I said to myself, of the two choices, the world of books is more sustainable. To do that as my primary focus and politics on the side, I'm more likely to be able to keep it going for longer.
What year are we talking about?
This
as
is
the inception of Cumberland Books.
Well, let's see. I graduated from college in 1990. Went to work for my dad, I thought, for a year. Turned into 3 years because, it's my father. And also, in the world of private press printing, the one thing you can be guaranteed of is that any project you start will take at least 3 times as long as you had planned. So I worked with him for 3 years, which was an amazing experience.
Oh, yeah.
And did 2 projects for him. Printed a Gehenna Press book called Jewish Artists of the Early and Late Renaissance. Set the type by hand, printed it on an Albion hand press, hand-inked with rollers, the way they used to make them. Yeah. And really gave me valuable insights into how books are made. You don't really get it on a deep, visceral level until you've actually done it. So that was an amazing experience. The other thing I did, it was coming up on the 50th anniversary of the press, and there was a big traveling exhibition that started at the Bridwell Library down at SMU. Yeah. And there was a catalog to go with that included a bibliography of the press of the first 50 years. And there'd been another bibliography done in the 70s that was had a lot of mistakes in it. And he asked me to revise the bibliography. So I pulled that together and sort of oversaw that side of the catalog. And it was at times a nightmarish assignment. It seemed as though for certain phases of the press's production there was no documentation whatsoever. For others, everything was kept, and so finding the relevant piece of information was like a needle in a haystack. But it came together. I think I haven't found too many mistakes in the intervening decades. And then at the end of '93, I moved to London and went to work at Sotheby's for a year and a half in the rare book department.
Tremendous experience.
As a junior cataloger. And that was like graduate school, basically.
Yeah, basically,
And about as profitable as graduate school in a financial sense. But I figured, if I was going to be a lawyer or a doctor, I'd be paying for graduate school. this way, at least, they paid me enough to cover my rent pretty much. And I learned a huge amount. I mean, that was really where I learned to catalog books. I remember going in at the beginning and with slightly strange circumstances. Roy Davids, who had been the head of the department and who had hired me, a case of nepotism, pure and simple. He was an old friend of my parents. Yeah. And he said, all right, we'll take him. And I'd moved to London with my new wife. We'd been married a couple of months. And we were looking for a flat and living in a basement room that we had borrowed from a friend of a friend. And I'm due to start work on Monday morning. And I get a phone call on Sunday, and it's Roy Davids, and he says, just wanted to let you know, as of Friday, I have left Sotheby's. And he was the only person in the department I knew or had ever met. So I arrive on Monday morning. The department is in complete turmoil. Sure. Roy had been running the show for years and a major player at Sotheby's, not just in the book department, but he was in charge of marketing globally for Sotheby's. And I guess he and D.D. Brooks never quite saw eye to eye, and he eventually left the hallowed halls of Sotheby's. So eventually the department settled down. I learned to catalog books. When I started, I remember taking bindings to one of my colleagues and saying, is this goat or sheep or calf? And really not being able to tell the difference. To my untrained eye, I couldn't see how you could tell one from the other. And within a month, I knew the difference. I learned to catalog books fast and reasonably accurately. Met everybody, saw everything, had great colleagues. In a way, I think it was maybe the last golden moment of the auction houses. That there were still incredible libraries coming in, and there were still just piles of everyday things coming in. They were still having 4 times a year what they call general sales, which would be 2-day, 1,400 lot auctions. Wow. And that was the stuff I was cataloging mostly. And then I sort of moved up as I learned what I was doing. Worked on some incredible collections. Otto Schaefer's library, and the Earls of Rosebery, fabulous things. So it was really an incredible experience. And nice colleagues.
When did you start Cumberland?
I started buying inventory when I was in London. I had had a lucky hit at an ephemera fair in Boxborough, Massachusetts.
Great place.
I bought a photograph because I liked it. It was, I'm not sure who the dealer who had it. It was an ephemera dealer, mostly had shaker stuff, and he had this nice framed photo. And it was $50, and I liked it, but I didn't $50 like it. And we haggled over the price. I brought my dad over to see, he was at the fair with me, to see if he liked it. He said, yeah, it's good. He said, offer him $25. I said, I can't offer him $25 for it. And Lenny said, $25 for it? The guy said $30. I said, take it. It was on an acid mat. I took it to my local framer to get it rematted. It turned out it was by Mahauli Naj. It was a signed vintage print from the 20s.
Wow.
Sold it at Sotheby's when I was working there. Kind of funny, as an employee, I didn't have to pay a commission, and the amount I saved on the commission was almost the same as what they paid me for my first year working there.
Really?
Yeah, it sold for $34,000, and that was my starting capital for Cumberland. I poured that money into books.
How are you with regard to the internet? Do you see it as a friend or a foe?
Yes.
Both?
Both.
Explain.
I think I'm unlike most dealers. I list no books at all on the internet. I use the internet constantly for research. Vast majority of my business is with institutions, and to be able to tell which institutions own books with a reasonable degree of accuracy is a crucial
Absolutely.
time saver for me. To be able to quote things to places and know that unless they just bought a copy and it hasn't been cataloged yet, or it happens to be on an old card catalog, to know with some pretty good degree of accuracy whether or not they have it makes my life infinitely more efficient as a bookseller. So in that way, it's been a huge friend. Also for research, it's been a remarkable research tool, and I'm able to find things. And for one thing, references to things in academic articles. I'm a pretty research-heavy bookseller.
Yeah.
The fundamental nature of my business, the way I add value, is by doing research. I take a book apart, I work out what makes it tick, why it's interesting, why it's compelling, why it's important. And there's a huge amount of information out there in the academic journals of the last 100 years. And there was no way to access that efficiently until the internet came along. You know, if you knew about something, if you subscribed to a journal and read it, then maybe you'd remember, oh yeah, there was that article. But to be able to punch in an obscure name and find that there's a reference to him in an article from an obscure journal from 40 years ago, and click, 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 and there it is on the screen in front of you. It's amazing.
It's totally amazing.
Yeah. How's it an enemy then? I think that it has, it's made everybody think that they're an expert. And
Go ahead.
I think that has harmed the fact that there actually are people with amazing expertise in the trade, and that expertise used to be a significant competitive advantage, and now everybody thinks they're an expert, and thus there's less of a willingness to actually defer to real expertise, and to be willing to say, actually, I don't know that, but I need to go to the person who does.
Who does?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a few general questions.
Sure.
Did you have any booksellers when you started in the trade who were like mentors or people who you would go to when you had need for advice?
A lot of people were really good to me. I mean, I was young when I started in the trade. You know, not quite Justin Schiller, Bernie Shapiro young, but I was 26 when I set up Cumberland. I was 30 when I joined the ABAA. Yeah, there were a lot of people who were really supportive. Who would I name? I don't want to play favorites, but David Block was particularly good to me when I was starting out. And he was downsizing when I was starting, and the core of my reference collection came from him. And he sold it to me on very favorable terms. And also gave me the single piece of advice that I think is the best piece of advice I've ever been given in the trade, which is, he said, never buy a book you have to apologize for.
That's a good piece of advice.
which it's served me well. I haven't always followed it, but
We can't.
can, but mostly yes.
Talk a little bit about what you see as the great challenges to booksellers as we go forward into the future.
Oh, I've got one big one that's head and shoulders above everything else. I think the last decade has been a time of massive change, obviously, in the book trade, triggered by the internet and by online bookselling, which has been a complete game changer. I think we're only about halfway done in terms of how much the internet will end up changing the book trade. I think the other piece that's coming that we're just starting to see the effects of is digitization and the availability of digital copies of books, either free or incredibly cheaply on the internet. And historically, the main reason why books have been bought either by institutions or by collectors is because they had text in them. A book was how you got a text. And now that primary reason for buying books has just pretty much started to disappear. Why would you have to buy a copy of a book when you can pull it up online? And so the reasons left to buy books for individuals, for institutions, there's other information in a book besides a text.
Yeah.
Illustration, printing, provenance, maps, annotations, binding, all of that stuff. But it's kind of secondary. And we're going to have to start focusing more and more on that stuff, because book as a repository of a text, I think, is about to disappear as the primary reason why we sell books. And that's true of the used trade, the rare trade, all the way up and down. New booksellers too.
Well, here we are. We're at the New York Book Fair. And what percentage of your business do you feel is done through book fairs? Or do you do many book fairs at all?
Interestingly, I just took a kind of a sabbatical the last year. I skipped Boston, I skipped LA. Before that, I had done every ABAA fair for the last decade. I'm a regular.
Yeah.
And in terms of business done at the fairs, I would say probably 20% of my business.
That's a good amount.
Good chunk. Connected to the fairs, probably higher.
Well, yeah.
But it's really hard to disentangle those. Overwhelmingly, my business is about ongoing relationships, mostly with institutions, some with collectors. And so fairs are a way to touch base with people.
Press the flesh.
Yeah. And, reconnect in person with people who I usually communicate with by email or by telephone. And so it's as much about relationships as anything else. And I think fairs are really crucial for that.
Yeah, they certainly are. Well, put a crystal ball in front of yourself, look into it, and tell me what you see the book business being like in the next 5, 10, or 15 years.
I think 10 years from now, or 15 years from now, the book trade, the antiquarian book trade, is going to look a lot more like the antique trade. I think that it's going to be much more about the selling of books as objects than it is about the selling of books as repositories of textual information. I think it's going to be a lot less people buying books because they're interested in what's in them as things to read. And there are still collectors who read their books. But it used to be that these books were the only sources of that information, and that's gone. That's going, and it's going to be gone. And that exclusivity is going to be a hard thing for the trade to give up, to realize that people can get it elsewhere, and get it more cheaply and get it more easily. So I think we're going to be selling books as objects. It's going to be
sitting in front of our computers with pajamas on and that kind of thing.
Absolutely, and that it's going to become a more of an exercise in aesthetics. It'll be more like the art world, more like the antique world, and it's always been different from those worlds. Not unrelated, but different. A bookstore was not the same thing as an antique store, and I think that our corner of the book world is going to come to resemble that world more.
Thanks very much for the interview. I see our time is up, and
My pleasure.
It goes quickly, and thanks for all your insight, etc., and go sell some books.
I'll do what I can.